Why was the sky so quiet after the explosion? That question haunted her in the seconds after the missile hit. One moment, the Fa-18 Super Hornet was alive beneath her, engines humming, systems steady, her breathing synced with the rhythm of flight. The next, the world became light and sound and chaos. A white-hot flash off her right wing, a shockwave like a punch to the chest, warning lights screaming across her HUD. Captain Laya Thompson didn't even have time to curse. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she said automatically, her voice steady out of habit. "This is Viper 1, I'm hit. Right engine gone, losing altitude." The jet shuddered, metal groaning like an animal in pain. Flames blossomed from the starboard engine, then another explosion, sharper, closer. The left engine coughed, sputtered, died. Her aircraft wasn't flying anymore. It was falling. 20,000 feet over Syrian desert. Hostile territory. No thrust, no lift, no options. She glanced at the horizon, trying to remember the emergency checklist, but there was no time. The nose dipped, her harness dug into her shoulders, and the G-forces crushed her chest. Only one choice left. She pulled the ejection handle. The canopy detonated. The rocket seat fired. Her world became a streak of sky and sound and velocity. For a fraction of a second she felt weightless, then slammed into the air at over 400 miles per hour. The seat kicked, the parachute deployed, and everything went quiet except for the flap of nylon and her own heartbeat. She was out. Below her, the Fa-18, her fighter, her home, her life, spiraled toward the desert floor, trailing smoke and fire. It hit the ground in a flash that swallowed the horizon. The concussion rolled through the air like thunder. Her throat went dry. She was breathing hard but not crying, not yet. She was alive. The parachute carried her down toward a sea of dunes and rock, toward enemy territory, toward militants who had seen the jet crash. They told her pilots don't engage, pilots evade, pilots survive until rescue arrives. But training and reality don't always match. As the ground rushed closer, Laya replayed her survival school training. Drop from a tower, roll on landing, recover gear, signal for extraction. All of it had been safe, rehearsed, academic. None of it had been this. She hit the ground hard, executed the landing roll, feet, knees, hip, shoulder, teeth jarring from the impact. Nothing broken. No pain she couldn't handle. She released the chute before it dragged her and crouched low, scanning the horizon. The air was cooling fast. The desert dusk had arrived. Silence for now, but not for long. Her survival kit hung from the harness, standard issue. Radio flares, mirror, first aid kit, water, Beretta M9 pistol with 2 spare magazines. 45 rounds. 45 rounds between her and capture. She took inventory with practiced precision, then froze. Distant engines, multiple north. They were coming. She keyed the radio. "Any station, this is Viper 1, pilot down, requesting immediate extraction." Static, then a voice faint but real. "Viper 1, this is Hawkeye, we copy your beacon. QRF is spinning up but minimum 4 hours to your position. You need to evade and stay hidden. Do not engage hostiles. Acknowledge." "Copy Hawkeye," she said softly. "Evade and stay hidden, 4 hours." 4 hours. The horizon flickered with headlights. She crouched low, using the dry riverbed a wadi for cover. The sand was cool beneath her gloves, the air heavy with the smell of dust and oil. She moved south, away from the noise, staying low, breathing slow. The M9 felt absurdly small in her hand. A pilot with a pistol, hunted by an army. They were getting closer, trucks, maybe 4 or 5. Machine guns mounted, professional formation, searchlights sweeping. She pressed herself against a rock outcropping and waited. She could see them now, dark silhouettes moving against the fading light. Militants with rifles, radios, discipline, not the ragged kind, trained men. They spread out in a search pattern. 2 of them moved toward her, step by step, 50 yards, 40, 30. Don't engage, she whispered to herself. Stay hidden. 20 yards. One of them stopped, pointed. Something had caught his eye, maybe her boot prints, maybe the discarded parachute harness. 15 yards. The rule was simple, do not engage. But rules don't mean much when someone's pointing a rifle at you. Laya exhaled once, slow, steady, and rose from behind the rock. Her stance automatic, two-handed grip, M9 aligned. She fired twice. Both rounds hit. The first fighter dropped instantly. The second swung his rifle toward her, but she was already moving, shifting position, firing again. He went down hard. Silence, then the desert erupted with gunfire. The sound came from everywhere. The technical trucks mounted guns spitting heavy rounds into the rocks, tearing the ground around her into shards. Fragments stung her face. She ducked, pressed herself against the stone, heart hammering. Every militant in the area knew exactly where she was. She looked at the pistol. 9 rounds versus mounted guns and automatic rifles. Not a fight she could win. She needed something stronger. The 2 fighters she dropped, both carried AK-47s. She waited for the machine gun to pause for reload, then sprinted 10 yards of open sand. Bullets chewed the ground behind her. She dove beside the first body, grabbed the AK, checked the magazine. 30 rounds, 4 spares on the vest. 5 magazines total. Now she had teeth. The gunner on the truck reloaded. She sighted down the AK, braced it against the rock, and fired a short burst. 3 rounds, the gunner slumped. The machine gun went silent. For a moment, just the wind. Then the sound of more engines. She scanned the ridge, 4 technicals this time, dust trails behind them. 20, maybe more, dismounting and spreading out, coordinated, organized. Laya checked her watch. 3 hours and 50 minutes to rescue. She could hide or she could fight. Hiding had already failed once. She moved again, fast and low, using terrain as cover, returning fire only when she had to. Short, controlled bursts, the way the instructors had drilled into her years ago. Ahead she saw it, the remains of an old structure, stone walls half buried in sand. Better cover. She ran for it. A fighter stepped out from behind a wall, rifle raised, 20 feet. She didn't stop, fired from the hip 3 rounds, he fell backward. She vaulted his body and slid into the ruins, heart pounding, lungs burning. Cover, finally cover. But it was a trap too. If they surrounded the ruins, she'd have nowhere to run. Her radio crackled. Viper 1, Hawkeye. We're tracking multiple vehicles closing on your position. Status. I'm in contact, she said between breaths. Heavy contact, surrounded. Can you hold until QRF arrival? She looked out across the desert, lines of fighters closing in. I'll hold, she said, but I need air support. Negative, Viper 1. Nearest strike package is 30 minutes out. Evade if possible. Can't evade, she said, ducking as rounds chipped the stone above her. They've got me boxed in. You're a pilot, Viper 1. Pilots don't engage. She laughed bitterly. Tell that to the 20 men shooting at me. She cut the transmission. The militants began advancing again, disciplined movement, bounding fire, suppression, flanking. This wasn't random chaos. This was trained warfare. She lined up her sights and fired one burst, then another. 2 fighters dropped. A third went to ground. The others hesitated. Her breathing steadied. Her body remembered what it meant to be a soldier, not just a pilot. The line between the two had disappeared somewhere between the ejection seat and the first kill. She checked her ammo, 4 magazines left, maybe 100 rounds. Not enough. The radio came alive again. Viper 1, be advised, you're surrounded on 3 sides. Only open route is south into open desert. Strike package ETA 25 minutes. Copy, she whispered, 25 minutes. 25 minutes to survive. They attacked again, two groups rushing simultaneously from opposite directions. She switched targets, short bursts precise. The AK kicked hard, brass casings flying. Fighters fell, but they kept coming. Reload, fire, move, repeat. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her throat burned from dust and adrenaline. This wasn't what pilots did. Pilots flew. But right now, Captain Laya Thompson was just a human being who refused to die quietly. The attack broke, the militants pulled back, bodies scattered in the sand, 11 down. She listened, they were talking over radios, reorganizing. She took the lull to move ammo closer, check her position. That's when she saw it, half buried in debris near the wall. An RPG launcher, one rocket still attached, another beside it. She'd never fired one in her life. But the principle was simple enough. Point, aim, fire, survive. She propped it on the wall, aimed at a technical truck 300 yards away. "All right," she muttered, "let's make them nervous." The trigger pull felt heavier than expected. The backblast nearly knocked her over. The rocket streaked across the night. Direct hit. The explosion ripped through the desert, lighting up the horizon. The truck disintegrated, flames consuming everything nearby. The militants stopped advancing, confusion shouting. She could almost hear their disbelief. The pilot wasn't hiding, the pilot was fighting. She reloaded the RPG with the last rocket, hands shaking from exhaustion. Checked her watch again. 20 minutes until air support. But the vehicles on the horizon weren't slowing down. More headlights, more dust. She was outnumbered, outgunned, out of time. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time since the missile hit her jet, Captain Laya Thompson felt something stronger than fear. She felt defiance. Why was she still alive? That question crossed her mind as the desert wind carried the smoke from the burning truck across the ruins. The flames danced like ghosts, painting the rocks orange and gold. She sat with her back against a crumbling wall, catching her breath, AK across her knees, sweat and sand mixing on her face. Her throat felt raw. Her hands trembled. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not on the ground, surrounded by enemies, counting bullets like seconds on a clock. She was supposed to be in the air, where she belonged. But reality doesn't ask permission before it changes the plan. Laya wiped her face with the back of her glove, forcing her thoughts to slow. Training first, emotions later. That's what they drilled into her. Her radio hissed. "Viper 1, Hawkeye. Strike package ETA 20 minutes, sitrep." She pressed the transmit button. In cover, engaged multiple hostiles, one vehicle destroyed with captured ordnance, ammo low. "Copy, Viper 1. Hold position if possible." Hold position. She almost laughed. The phrase sounded so simple when someone else said it. Hold position. Stay alive, defy physics. She leaned her head back against the stone. The adrenaline crash hit her hard. Her breathing slowed, heart pounding like distant artillery in her chest. She felt it, the creeping edge of fear. Not panic, but that cold awareness of just how small she really was out here. 4 hours until rescue. 20 minutes until air support. Dozens of fighters still out there. She looked at the bodies around the ruins, 6, maybe 7, that she could see. More beyond the rocks. She hadn't meant to kill anyone. She wasn't trained to. But survival doesn't care about intentions. For a brief, quiet moment, she wondered what they'd been told about her. The men she'd killed. What story their commanders had fed them. Probably that she was a target, a symbol, an American pilot worth capturing alive. They weren't wrong. She closed her eyes. And in the dark behind her eyelids she saw something else. The hangar bay of the USS George H.W. Bush, weeks before deployment. Laughter. Crew members drinking bad coffee, teasing one another about flight hours and carrier landings. Someone had asked her then, "What scares you most, Captain?" She said, crashing. But what she hadn't said was the part that always followed, not dying in the crash, living after it. A crack of gunfire yanked her back to the present. She turned, instinct leading before thought. A muzzle flash flared near the ridge. She shifted, lined up her sights, and squeezed the trigger. 3 rounds. Silence. Her magazine was nearly empty. She swapped it with the last full one, counting what was left. 2 spares, 60 rounds. It wouldn't be enough if they charged again. A sound, engine revving, tires grinding sand. She crawled to a gap in the wall and looked through. More trucks, maybe 3. Headlights cutting through smoke. They were repositioning, careful this time, keeping their distance. "Learning," she muttered, "that's bad." The radio crackled again. "Viper 1, be advised, thermal shows reinforcements inbound. Larger convoy, ETA 10 minutes. "Copy," she whispered, then softer to herself, 10 minutes is forever. She checked the RPG, one last rocket. That was her thunderbolt, her only heavy weapon. She couldn't waste it. If they closed in again, she'd wait until she saw the whites of their eyes, or the shine of their gunmetal before she fired. For now, she stayed low and quiet, the kind of stillness that comes only from fear and discipline sharing the same space. A voice floated over the wind, Arabic shouted commands. Then gunfire, not directed at her, warning shots. They were coordinating. Her pulse quickened. She touched the M9 pistol at her thigh, the weapon she'd ejected with. That was the last line of defense. She hoped she wouldn't need it. The desert night had fallen fast. Shadows stretched long and black across the sand. The stars came out sharp and cold above her, and for a moment she wondered if anyone on that carrier deck was looking up at them too, counting time, waiting, hoping she was still breathing. She wanted to believe that someone was. The first truck crested the ridge again. Laya lifted the RPG, braced it against the wall, and tracked the vehicle's movement. The launcher felt heavier than it had before, or maybe her arms were just weaker now. She waited until the truck slowed, until she could almost feel its weight on the ground, and fired. The rocket screamed through the dark, hit the truck dead center. Another explosion, fireball, chaos, fighters scattered, shouts echoed through the night. She dropped the empty tube and pressed herself flat to the dirt. The concussion rolled through her chest. Her ears rang, dust raining down from the crumbling stone. Her radio buzzed. "Viper 1, we saw that detonation. Strike package 5 minutes out. Mark your position." She pulled a flare from the kit, struck the igniter, and threw it 20 yards away. Orange smoke bled into the night. "Flare deployed," she said. "Everything north of the smoke is hostile." "Copy, stay down, they're inbound now." The roar came first, faint at the edge of hearing, then building, growing, until the sky itself seemed to vibrate. 2 FA-18s, low and fast, streaked overhead. Her jets, her people. Missiles fell from their wings, fire streaks across the dark. The ground erupted. Thunder rolled across the desert. Shockwaves pounded the ruins. The sky turned white with heat and fury. Laya pressed herself into the dirt, eyes shut tight. The world shook. And then silence. When she looked up, smoke was rising from the horizon. The trucks were gone. The fighters gone. The battlefield was nothing but fire, dust, and ruin. She stayed on her stomach, breathing hard. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her ears rang with the aftermath of destruction. "Viper 1, the radio said. "Area secure. QRF inbound. 90 minutes to extraction." 90 minutes. She exhaled a shaky breath. 90 minutes might as well have been a lifetime, but she could make it now. She earned that right. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the cool stone. She survived. That word "survived" felt heavier than it ever had before. It wasn't victory. It wasn't glory. It was something quieter, sadder. She thought of the men she'd killed, the faces she barely saw, the lives she ended because she refused to be the next casualty. They'd told her pilots don't engage. But maybe sometimes surviving meant breaking every rule you were ever taught. The hours dragged. The adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion in its place. Her body ached everywhere, muscles tight, bruises blooming across her shoulders from the rifle stock. The silence was deafening. Every sound a shift of sand, a creak of wind made her flinch. Then at last she heard it, the low thump of rotor blades. She crawled to the edge of the ruins and looked up. Two silhouettes against the horizon, CH-53 Super Stallions, escorted by Viper gunships. Her rescue. They came in fast, kicking up a storm of dust and sand. Marines dropped on ropes, weapons ready, forming a tight perimeter. "Captain Thompson," one of them shouted through the noise. She raised her hand weakly. "That's me." The squad leader approached, helmet visor gleaming under the moonlight. "Ma'am, we're here to bring you home. You injured?" "No," she said, "just tired." He looked around, the burned trucks, the bodies, the spent casings, the smoldering sand. His expression shifted from disbelief to awe. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "with all due respect, what the hell happened here?" Laya holstered her sidearm. "They tried to capture me," she said quietly, "so I fought back." "You fought back?" He scanned the destruction again, the cratered earth, the twisted metal. "How many hostiles did you engage?" She shrugged. "I stopped counting." He grinned, shaking his head. "Ma'am, you're a goddamn legend." She didn't feel like one. The Marines led her to the helicopter. As they lifted off, she looked down at the desert, the fire, the wreckage. 4 hours ago, she'd fallen from the sky with nothing but a pistol and a prayer. Now she was leaving behind a battlefield she'd never meant to create. They told her pilots don't engage. But the desert had rewritten that rule. She leaned her head against the metal wall of the helicopter, eyes heavy. The vibration of the rotors filled her bones. Exhaustion won, her eyes closed. And for the first time in what felt like years, she dreamed not of flight but of silence. The kind that comes only after everything you feared has already happened. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? That was the question that lingered in Captain Laya Thompson's mind as the CH-53 thundered over the dark sea. Inside the cabin it was loud, the engines, the rotors, the radios, but beneath it all, silence lived in her chest. That cold, hollow quiet that comes after too much noise. She sat strapped to a bench between two Marines, her flight suit streaked with dust and blood that wasn't all hers. Her helmet sat in her lap. Her hands still trembled, but no one mentioned it. The crew knew when not to speak. They all avoided her eyes. She didn't blame them. There's a kind of distance that forms around people who have seen too much in too little time. It isn't fear exactly, more like respect mixed with uncertainty. She had felt it before with others. Now she was the one everyone was careful around. The sea below was black glass, the horizon faint with starlight. She leaned against the vibrating bulkhead and tried to process what had happened. But her mind refused to play it straight. Everything came in fragments. The sound of her pistol, the recoil of the AK, the explosion of the truck, the silence afterward. The helicopter dipped slightly, the pilot's voice crackling through the intercom. "ETA to carrier, 5 minutes. 5 minutes to home." Except after tonight, home didn't feel like a word that belonged anywhere anymore. The carrier's deck lights appeared as tiny dots in the distance, growing brighter. She felt the change in pitch as the pilot adjusted for landing. The big helicopter shuddered, then settled down hard. The rear ramp dropped. Wind, salt, and jet fuel hit her face. Marines disembarked first, spreading out to secure the perimeter, even though everyone here was friendly. Habit. Then one of them turned back toward her, motioning. "Ma'am, welcome back." She stood, legs unsteady but holding. The metal beneath her boots vibrated with the heartbeat of the ship, a sound she knew as well as her own. Half the air wing was waiting. Crew, officers, deckhands, faces she'd known for months, maybe years. Some smiling, some starring. Cameras. Applause that felt awkward and wrong in her ears. Commander David Brennan, her air wing commander, approached first. "Captain Thompson," he said, "welcome home." She saluted automatically, voice rough. "Thank you, sir." He gestured toward the superstructure. "The Admiral wants you debriefed immediately." "Of course." They walked together across the deck. The wind was harsh, cutting through her suit. Below, the ocean was an endless, merciless dark. She hadn't cried yet. That would come later, maybe. Right now, she was still in survival mode, that strange, numb focus that doesn't know the difference between danger and safety. The debriefing room was crowded. Too crowded. Admirals, commanders, intelligence officers, legal staff, her squadron co. They all turned to look as she entered. "Captain Thompson," said Admiral James Cortez, the strike group commander. "Glad you're back safely. Sit down." She did. The metal chair was cold. The room smelled like coffee and tension. "Let's start with the basics," Cortez said. "You were shot down over hostile territory, ejected safely. Then, instead of evading as trained, you engaged enemy forces in sustained ground combat. Walk us through your decision-making." Laya inhaled slowly, her throat tight. "Yes, sir." And she told them. Everything. The missile strike, the ejection, the landing, the approaching vehicles, the two fighters she shot with her pistol, taking the AK, the first wave, the second, the RPG, the long, endless waiting for air support. Her voice never rose. She spoke like she was narrating someone else's story, flat, factual, as if keeping emotion out of it would make it smaller, less real. When she finished, the room was silent. The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "You killed 11 confirmed enemy combatants, destroyed 2 vehicles, held off a reinforced force for 4 hours. You did this alone on foot with captured weapons. That correct?" "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "You understand pilots are trained to evade, not engage." "Yes, sir." "So why did you?" She hesitated. "Because the situation didn't allow for evasion. They found me within minutes. I had 2 choices, fight or get captured." "Captured," said the Admiral, "would have meant interrogation, propaganda, possible execution. You were aware of that." "Yes, sir, which is why I fought." He studied her for a long moment, the kind of silence that feels like judgment or maybe awe. Then he turned to the intelligence officer. "Commander Hayes, your assessment." Commander Hayes flipped through his notes. "Sir, satellite imagery and intercepted communications confirm Captain Thompson's engagement neutralized a high-value militant unit we've been tracking for months. Her actions disrupted their operations significantly." "So," the Admiral said slowly, "she didn't just survive. She eliminated a priority target group." "Yes, sir." Another silence. The Admiral sighed. "Captain Thompson, what you did was either extremely brave or extremely reckless. I haven't decided which, but the results speak for themselves." Laya didn't answer. There wasn't a right thing to say. "I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross," he said. "The citation will note heroism while participating in aerial flight." She frowned. "Sir, I wasn't flying, I was fighting on the ground." "Your heroism began when your aircraft was engaged," Cortez said. "Everything that followed was part of that same engagement." She nodded slowly, though something about that didn't sit right. He stood. "Outstanding work, Captain. You've made the Navy proud." Dismissed. She saluted. "Yes, sir." The door closed behind her with a heavy thud. Outside, the corridor felt too bright, too normal. People walked past carrying folders and coffee cups, laughing about routine things. For them, the war was numbers and reports. For her, it was still under her fingernails. Back in her quarters, she stripped out of her flight suit. The sink water ran brown with sand. She stared into the mirror, pale skin, red-rimmed eyes, bruises at her jaw. She looked like a ghost wearing a pilot's name tag. She sat on the bunk, elbows on knees, hands clasped. That's when the tremors came back. Small at first, then stronger until she had to clench her fists to hide them. Her brain replayed everything, the gunfire, the explosions, the screams. She whispered, "Stop," but her mind didn't listen. She leaned forward, pressing her palms to her eyes until colors burst behind them. "You survived," she told herself. "You did what you had to do." But survival doesn't always feel like victory. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she walked the flight deck alone. The sea was calm again, the sun rising orange behind the carrier's silhouette. Jets lined up in neat rows, silent and obedient. That's where she belonged, in the cockpit, where problems made sense. She thought about the men she killed. She didn't know their names, but she remembered their eyes just before the first shot, just after the last. They'd probably believed in something, same as she did. She inhaled the cold sea air and let it fill her lungs until her chest hurt. "Morning, Captain." Commander Brennan's voice pulled her back. He approached slowly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She accepted a mug. Was it that obvious? He smiled faintly, only to those of us who have been there. They stood side by side for a while, watching the sea. "You did good, Laya," he said finally. "You brought yourself home, that's what matters." She nodded, staring at the horizon. "It doesn't feel like that." "It won't, not for a while." She sipped the coffee. It was terrible and perfect. "Sir," she asked quietly, "you ever wonder if we train too narrowly, that maybe we prepare for the wrong war?" He tilted his head. "How do you mean?" "We train pilots to fly, but not to fight when the flying stops." He considered that. "Maybe we assume we'll always have the sky." "But sometimes," she said softly, "the sky takes you back." Brennan looked at her for a long moment. "You might be right." She smiled faintly. "That's the first time an air wing commander's ever said that to me." He chuckled. "Don't get used to it." For the first time since the crash, she felt something close to warmth. Not joy, not peace, just the faint reminder that she was still human. Later that day, she walked through the hangar bay. Crew members turned as she passed, whispering. "That's her," someone said. "The devil pilot." She hated the nickname. She hadn't fought to become a legend. She fought to stay alive. That night she wrote in her logbook, not mission details, just words that came without structure. "They told me pilots don't engage." Maybe they should have said pilots don't start fights, but sometimes survival finishes them. She closed the notebook and stared at the page until the ink blurred. Outside, the ocean stretched endless and indifferent. She was back where she belonged. But a part of her was still in the desert, lying in the dirt, clutching an AK that wasn't hers, whispering, "I'm still here." Why did surviving feel harder than fighting? Weeks had passed since the crash, but Captain Laya Thompson still woke up at 300, drenched in sweat, hands clenched, breath shallow, the echo of explosions chasing her out of dreams. The room around her was safe, quiet, steel gray and humming with the ship's constant vibration. But her mind was still back there in that wadi, surrounded by men who never stopped coming. She sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the floor. The scars were small, a few bruises, a small burn from the ejection seat, but the real damage didn't leave marks. The ship's PA announced morning flight ops. Jet engines screamed to life somewhere above. She flinched. Every takeoff sounded like another missile streaking toward her. She pressed her palms against her ears, breath slowly. "It's over," she whispered. "You made it back." But back didn't mean whole. At breakfast, people tried to treat her normally. They smiled too much or not at all. Conversation stopped when she walked in. Some avoided her altogether, not out of cruelty but confusion. How do you talk to someone who fought a small war alone? Her call sign Viper 1 had become legend. The Devil Pilot, the crew called her now. She'd seen it written on the side of a maintenance locker once in black marker. The story had spread far beyond the carrier. Other squadrons were talking. Other ships. The myth was growing faster than the woman it came from. But myths don't sleep. Myths don't bleed. She kept her routine tight, pre-flight checks, simulator time, debriefs, workouts. Anything to keep her mind from wandering. The moment she sat still too long, the memories came crawling back. The sound of brass hitting stone. The flash of the first man she shot. The smell of burned metal. And underneath it all, the guilt. Because for all the talk of heroism, all the medals and commendations being drafted in her name, she knew what really happened. It wasn't bravery. It was desperation wearing discipline as armor. One night she sat alone in the ready room after flight ops. The lights were dim, the sea outside black as spilled ink. Her flight helmet sat on the table, the visor cracked from her ejection impact. She stared at it for a long time. "You look like hell," a voice said softly. She turned. It was Commander Brennan. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, same as he always did. "Sir," she said, forcing a small smile, "you have terrible timing." He handed her a mug and sat across from her. "I'm consistent. That's worth something." They sat in silence for a while. "You flew today," he said eventually. "Yeah." "How'd it feel?" She shrugged, like pretending. He studied her. "You're cleared for duty, medically and psychologically." "I'm cleared on paper," she said. "That's different." He nodded. "Paper doesn't mean much out here." She looked at him, searching his face. "How long until it feels normal again?" He sighed. "For me, it took a while, different war, same ghosts." "You ever kill anyone up close?" He hesitated. "Once, in Afghanistan, crash site, I was the only survivor." "How'd you live with it?" "I didn't, not for a long time. But I learned something: surviving doesn't make you guilty. It makes you responsible, for remembering, for teaching." That word teaching stuck with her. He stood. "Get some rest, Laya. You've got admirals quoting you now. The least you can do is sleep through it." She smirked faintly. "Good night, sir." When he left, she sat there a long time, sipping cold coffee and staring at the cracked visor. Responsible. The next morning, she received a message from Fleet Command. "Captain Thompson is requested to address the Naval Aviation SEER School at her earliest availability." She read it twice. The SEER School, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, the same program that had once taught her how to hide, how to evade, how not to fight. The same program whose rules she'd broken to stay alive. She wasn't sure whether they wanted to honor her or study her. Still, she said yes. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of 200 student pilots at the Naval Air Station in Nevada. The desert air was dry, the kind that burns the back of your throat. Rows of young aviators in flight suits sat in neat formation, their faces eager, expectant. She wore her dress uniform. The Distinguished Flying Cross rested on her chest, heavy as truth. When she began speaking, her voice was steady, quieter than she expected, but sure. "They're going to teach you how to survive," she said. "How to hide, how to signal for rescue, how to wait. You'll practice evading capture. You'll learn how to endure interrogation if you fail. And it's all good training. It might save your life." She paused. The wind tugged at the flag behind her. "But understand something: that training assumes you'll have time and space to evade. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes the enemy finds you before you've even hit the ground. Sometimes hiding isn't an option." A few students shifted uncomfortably. She looked at them, boys and girls barely out of college, faces full of faith in rules. "What do you do then?" she asked quietly, "when evasion is impossible?" No one answered. "You fight," she said simply. "With whatever you have, using whatever you can find. You fight not because you're trained to, but because dying quietly isn't survival, because fear doesn't excuse surrender. A young lieutenant raised her hand. "Ma'am, what if we're not good at fighting? We're pilots, not infantry." Laya nodded. "You're warriors first, pilots second. The aircraft is just your weapon platform. When you lose it, you don't stop being a warrior. You adapt." She could feel the instructors watching her, silent, assessing, maybe uncomfortable. She didn't care. Another student asked, "Were you scared, ma'am?" "Every second," Laya said. "But fear's not your enemy. It's your warning system. It sharpens you. You just have to keep it from owning you." She paused, then touched the medal on her chest. "I killed 11 men," she said quietly. "I destroyed 2 vehicles. I held out for 4 hours. I was terrified the whole time. Fear and competence can exist together. Don't ever believe they can't." Silence, the kind that makes people sit straighter. When the lecture ended, the students stood and saluted. Some came up afterward, asking questions, hungry for details she didn't want to relive. But one young man, maybe 23, stayed behind when the others left. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, "I think what you did changed how I see this job." "How that?" "I used to think surviving was just luck. Now I think it's a skill." Laya smiled faintly. "It is, but skills mean nothing without the will to use them." He nodded, saluted, and left. When the room was empty, she looked out through the window. Beyond the airfield, the desert stretched endless and pale. For a moment, it looked just like the one she'd fallen into. She walked outside and stood in the sunlight. The air shimmered with heat. She could almost hear echoes, gunfire, wind, her own heartbeat. "Warrior first," she whispered. The words didn't feel like pride. They felt like truth, the kind that doesn't need approval. Later, one of the instructors approached her quietly. "You know, Captain, you've started something," he said. "The Navy's reviewing survival training protocols, more weapons drills, ground tactics. You might have changed the syllabus." She smiled, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Good. Change means someone learned something." He tilted his head. "Some people say pilots shouldn't be soldiers, that your experience was exceptional." She turned to him, "So was getting shot down." He didn't argue. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, she sat alone on a bench outside the barracks. The air cooled, the desert turning gold, then red, then black. She thought about the word exceptional, how it's usually used to describe things that should never have to happen twice. She didn't want her story to be exceptional. She wanted it to be preparation. Because next time, it might not be her. A single moment of wind lifted the edge of her uniform sleeve. The metal glinted, catching the last light. She touched it gently, almost absently. It didn't feel like honor, it felt like memory. And memory, she realized, was its own kind of weapon. Part 4-1, 620 words. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, where she begins to question her growing fame, faces internal conflict between myth and reality, and starts mentoring younger pilots who see her as more than human? You said 5. ChatGPT said. Perfect. Here's Part 5, continuing Laya's journey after the seer lecture, as she struggles with her rising fame, moral conflict, and the quiet burden of being turned into a symbol. Tone, cinematic, emotional, deeply introspective, paced for voiceover narration. Length, 1,500 plus words. When did survival become a story? That question followed Captain Laya Thompson everywhere now, through the narrow corridors of the carrier, across the hangar deck, even into her dreams. Somewhere between the desert and the ocean, between reality and retelling, she'd stopped being a person and become something else. A headline, a briefing slide, a myth wrapped in medals. They called her the Devil Pilot. They said she fought like 10 men. They said she'd smiled while firing an RPG. Every version got a little louder, a little less true. She never corrected them. But every time she heard it, something inside her went quieter. The ship's public affairs officer had started fielding interview requests. News networks wanted her on camera. The Pentagon wanted an official statement. Recruiters wanted her face on posters, a symbol of modern resilience. She refused them all. She didn't survive to inspire marketing. And yet, even without her consent, the story spread faster than she could outrun it. The first time she saw her own face on a Navy morale poster, she froze. The caption read, "Courage isn't in the cockpit, it's in the choice to keep fighting." She'd stared at it for a long time. The photo wasn't even from the battle, it was her official portrait, smiling in uniform. It didn't show the dirt under her nails or the fear in her throat. It didn't show what courage actually felt like: small, cold, desperate. She tore the poster down and folded it neatly before tossing it into the trash. That night she went to the observation deck, where the stars were sharp and infinite. The sea whispered below. She stood with her hands on the railing, the wind cold against her skin, and asked the question that wouldn't leave her alone. What if survival shouldn't be glorified? Because survival wasn't clean. It was messy and loud and brutal. It left stains you couldn't see. Behind her, someone spoke. "You keep sneaking up here." Commander Brennan, same calm tone, same quiet presence. He leaned beside her on the railing. "Can't sleep." She shook her head. "Not when the ship's quiet." "Too quiet." "Too honest," she said. He smiled slightly. "The quiet always tells the truth." They stood there in silence for a while, the sea stretching endlessly around them. "You saw the poster," he said eventually. She sighed. "Everyone did." "They mean well." "I know, but they don't understand." He turned toward her. "Then make them understand. You have a platform now. Use it." She frowned. "To do what? Tell the world that I was terrified, that I wasn't trying to be brave, just trying not to die." "Exactly that," he said softly. "That's the part no one ever says out loud." She looked at him, searching his eyes for something solid. "You think anyone wants to hear that from their heroes?" He smiled sadly. "Heroes don't get to choose what people need to hear." For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly, "I didn't ask to be one." "Most of them don't." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and oil. A flight deck light blinked in the distance, red and lonely. "Sir," she said, "what if I told you I didn't feel brave? That sometimes I wish I'd just followed orders, hid, waited, done nothing." He studied her. "Then I'd tell you that fear and regret mean you're still human, and that's exactly why your story matters." Laya looked away toward the horizon. "I don't want to be a story." He chuckled. "Too late for that." She smiled faintly. "That's what I was afraid of." The next day her schedule resumed like clockwork: training flights, mission briefs, maintenance reports. The same rhythm she'd lived before the crash, but something about it felt different now. Detached. Her wingman, Lieutenant Jake Ree, had started teasing her again, a sign that the crew was slowly finding normalcy. "Viper 1, he said over the radio. "You ready for another thrilling routine patrol?" "Ready as ever, Viper 2. No surface-to-air missiles this time, right?" "Let's not tempt fate." A pause, then his voice again, light, joking, but not entirely. "If we do get hit, should I hide and wait for rescue, or pull a Captain Thompson and fight an army by myself?" She laughed softly, but her reply carried weight. "Do whatever it takes to survive, Jake. Rules are guidelines. Reality doesn't always read the manual." He chuckled. "Copy that." As the two jets cut through the morning haze, Laya felt something shift. The sound of engines, the vibration of the stick in her hand, it was grounding. The sky had always been her sanctuary, her truth. Up here, she could breathe again. But even in the air, she couldn't escape the weight of what she represented. Every call sign she heard over the comms, every salute she received on deck, All of it carried the same quiet question. How does it feel to be her? That night she wrote a letter, not to anyone specific, just words she needed out of her system. They call me brave, but courage isn't what it looks like on posters. It's smaller. It's shaking hands holding a gun you barely know how to use. It's being so scared you forget what hope feels like. It's surviving, not because you believe you'll win, but because giving up feels worse. She folded the page and locked it in her flight log. Days turned into weeks. Missions blurred together. Her name appeared in briefings, in recruitment campaigns, even in training curriculums. She didn't recognize the woman they were describing: fierce, fearless, unbreakable. Unbreakable. That word made her laugh sometimes, because she'd broken, she just hadn't shown it. Late one evening she was called to the Admiral's office. The message said informal, but the Navy never really did informal. Admiral Cortez greeted her with a handshake and a measured smile. "Captain Thompson, at ease, have a seat." She sat. "I wanted to let you know," he said, "that the department's reviewing your after-action report as part of a new training doctrine. Your engagement might influence how we teach future aviators." "That's good, sir." "It is, but it also means more public attention. You'll be cited in materials, possibly speak at the War College next quarter." Laya hesitated. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Always." "I don't think I'm the right example." He raised an eyebrow. "You survived against impossible odds." "Because I was lucky," she said, "and desperate. That's not a doctrine, it's chaos with discipline." The Admiral smiled faintly. "That may be the most accurate definition of combat I've ever heard." She didn't smile back. "Sir, with respect, if this story teaches anything, it should be about adapting, not heroism." "Adaptation is heroism, Captain. We don't all wear it the same way." She nodded, though her chest felt heavy. When she left his office, she passed a group of junior officers in the hallway. They snapped to attention as she walked by. Their eyes shone with something that looked like worship. She wanted to tell them not to look at her that way. She wanted to tell them that heroes bleed like everyone else. They just do it quietly. That night she found herself back on the flight deck again, watching the horizon fade into darkness. The ship cut through the waves, lights glowing faintly against the void. She spoke softly, as if to no one. "They keep saying I changed things, but I didn't change anything. I just survived." A voice answered from behind her, a mechanic she barely knew, standing with a wrench in hand. "Maybe that's exactly what needed changing, ma'am." She looked at him, young, tired, honest, no agenda. "What do you mean?" "Everyone talks about winning, about missions, about kills, but surviving, no one teaches that right, not like you did." Then he walked away, leaving her with the sound of the sea and that one simple truth. Survival wasn't glory, it was continuance. It was the quiet, stubborn refusal to disappear. As the carrier lights reflected off the water, she thought of the desert again, the smell of burning fuel, the heat of the RPG launch, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her helmet. And for the first time since it happened, she whispered something she hadn't said aloud since that day. "Thank you." She didn't know who it was meant for: the Marines, the air support, the sky itself. Maybe all of them, maybe none. She just knew that for once, it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like acceptance. Why did teaching feel harder than surviving? That question echoed in Captain Laya Thompson's head as she stood at the front of the small, fluorescent-lit briefing room aboard the USS George H.W. Bush. Rows of young aviators sat in silence, flight suits crisp, helmets under their arms. Their eyes were bright, too bright. The kind of brightness that only comes from not knowing what darkness really means yet. She leaned against the console, arms crossed. "You've all read the updated SEER protocols," she said. "More weapons drills, more ground tactics, more emphasis on survival under direct contact." A hand shot up a young lieutenant, barely out of flight school. "Ma'am, is this because of your engagement?" She hesitated. The room went still. "Yes," she said finally, "because what happened to me shouldn't have been survivable, and yet it was. The Navy's smart enough to learn from the impossible." Nervous laughter flickered through the room, but her eyes stayed hard. "You think you'll never crash, that you'll never have to fight on the ground. Think again. The enemy doesn't care about your job title. Out there, you're not pilots, you're targets, and targets don't get second chances." The laughter died. She softened her tone. "But warriors do, and that's what you are, warriors who fly." A pause. She let the silence hang long enough to sting, then nodded once. "That's all dismissed." As they filed out, she caught sight of one pilot lingering near the door, Lieutenant Maria Decker. 25. Quiet. Exceptionally skilled in simulators but prone to overthinking under stress. Laya recognized that look in her eyes, the same mix of discipline and self-doubt she'd once seen in herself. "You stayed behind for a reason?" Laya asked. Decker hesitated. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Always." "I keep running your scenario in my head," Decker said. "The shoot-down, the fight, the waiting, and I can't figure out how you stayed calm, how you didn't just freeze." Laya tilted her head. "Who says I did?" Decker blinked. "I was terrified, Lieutenant," Laya said. "Every minute. Calm isn't the absence of fear, it's just fear under control. You don't erase it, you steer it." Decker nodded slowly, like she was memorizing every word. "Ma'am," she asked after a moment, "would you have done it again? Engaged, I mean." Laya thought about it, not quickly, not lightly. "If the situation was the same," she said softly, "yes, but if I could choose, I'd rather never be forced to again." That night she walked the hangar deck alone, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. The new generation of pilots was training harder than ever. Her survival had rewritten the syllabus. Now they drilled small arms handling and ground evasion alongside aerial tactics. She watched them fire in the simulator bays, precise, methodical, confident. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt old. Not in years, but in ghosts. She survived what they were preparing for, and the cost of that survival lived in her bones. "Captain Thompson," came a voice behind her. It was Admiral Cortez, stepping out from the shadows near the maintenance catwalk. "Heard you're turning the next batch into warriors." She smiled faintly. "Just trying to make sure none of them end up where I did." "Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person to teach them." He joined her beside the row of parked Hornets, each one glinting under hangar lights. "Your name becoming doctrine, you know," he said. "Thompson protocols, adaptive survival procedures. They're already using it at the War College." She winced slightly. "That's not what I wanted." "What did you want?" "For the story to stop with me." He studied her expression. "You can't control legends, Captain. You can only shape them." She looked at him, eyes tired but steady. "Then I'd rather it shape them into survivors, not soldiers chasing ghosts." He nodded once, the kind of nod that meant understanding but not agreement. "Fair enough." 2 weeks later, the squadron deployed again, northern Syria. Same airspace, same terrain, different mission. Laya led the formation. Decker was her wingman. "Viper flight," the radio crackled. "You're cleared to target grid 315. Routine strike, low resistance expected." Routine. That word always made Laya uneasy. Combat was never routine, it just hadn't gone wrong yet. Altitude 20,000 feet, clear skies. The desert below stretched endless, familiar and cruel. "Feels like déjà vu," Decker said over comms. "Let's keep it that way without the crash part," Laya replied. They flew in silence for a few minutes. Then warning tones screamed in Laya's headset. "Radar lock." "Viper 2, break right," she shouted. "Missile launch, missile launch." A white trail shot from the horizon. "Chaff flares." Decker's Hornet banked hard but too late. The explosion lit the sky. A shockwave rocked Laya's jet. Her HUD flickered with static. Viper 2, eject, eject. No response. Then a voice strained, gasping, ejecting now. Laya saw the canopy blow. The tiny figure launched upward, parachute deploying. Her heart seized. Not again. Command Viper 1. We have a pilot down, transmitting coordinates. Copy Viper 1. QRF spinning up, 4-hour window. 4 hours. The same damn number. She circled once, scanning the terrain, but militants were already moving. Dust plumes, vehicles, small arms fire. The same nightmare playing out again, but this time she wasn't the one in the dirt. Command, they're converging fast, she said. We need CAS now. Negative, Viper 1. You're ordered to return to base. Ground rescue is en route. Return to base, she snapped. She won't last an hour. Those are your orders. Laya stared at the horizon, the smoke, the sand, the ghosts rising from her own past. She switched frequencies. Decker, can you hear me? Static, then a weak voice. Copy, I'm down. I see movement north. They're close. Laya's throat tightened. Stay low, Decker. Hide. Use your beacon. I'm coming. Ma'am, Command said. I said I'm coming. She banked hard south, ignoring every rule, every protocol, the same way she'd broken them once before. Her HUD screamed low fuel warnings as she descended to 3,000 feet. The desert loomed below, alive with gunfire. Viper 1, this is Hawkeye Control, the voice came sharp with alarm. You are violating RTB order. Confirm intent. Intent, she said bitterly, to not let history repeat itself. She spotted movement, a cluster of vehicles near a small ravine. Smoke flares, small arms fire. Visual on down pilot, she called. Engaging. Negative, Viper 1, disengage. Too late. She armed her cannon, lined up the shot and squeezed. The desert erupted in tracers and flame. Vehicles exploded, scattering militants. She banked again, coming around for another pass. Viper 1, you're out of ammo. Not yet, she muttered, firing her last burst into the sand just ahead of the fighters closing on Decker's position. She saw them scatter. Decker crawled behind a rock, alive but trapped. Command, she's pinned. I'm bingo fuel. You need that QRF now. Rescue inbound. ETA 20 minutes. You need to RTB immediately or you'll be joining her on the ground. Laya's jaw clenched. Copy, she said finally, voice breaking. She climbed, steadying the jet with trembling hands. Her fuel gauge blinked red. Below, she saw the rescue choppers approaching, dust kicking up from their rotors, smoke cutting across the horizon. Only when she saw them reach Decker's flare did she exhale. Later, back on deck, she walked straight to the hangar bay, helmet still under her arm. The crew stared, half relief, half anger. Brennan met her halfway. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking I wasn't going to let her die the way I almost did. You disobeyed a direct order. I acted, she said, eyes cold, and she's alive because of it. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're turning every regulation into a footnote. Maybe regulations need better margins, she said. The next morning, Decker was brought back, shaken, bruised, but alive. When she saw Laya, she saluted, voice trembling. Ma'am, I heard you over the radio. You stayed with me. Laya smiled softly. We don't leave our own behind. Decker nodded, eyes glistening. I won't forget it. Neither would Laya. That night she stood alone on the deck, the stars above sharp and indifferent. The sea stretched endlessly, calm, merciless, eternal. She whispered to the wind, maybe I didn't survive to prove strength. Maybe I survived to teach it. The words felt true. And for the first time since the crash, she felt peace. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because she'd finally learned how to live with them. Why did doing the right thing always feel so wrong afterward? Captain Laya Thompson sat alone outside the carrier's ready room, the bulkhead cold against her back, her helmet resting beside her boots. The corridor lights buzzed faintly overhead. She could still hear the engines winding down on deck above, the sound that usually meant home. Tonight it sounded like judgment. The summons had come within hours of her landing. Command inquiry, 900. No other details, no need. Everyone knew what it was about. She disobeyed a direct order in hostile airspace. She risked a $40 million aircraft to cover a downed pilot. She'd broken protocol again. And once again, someone was alive because of it. The door opened. Commander Brennan stepped out, a folder tucked under his arm. His eyes were tired, voice low. "They're ready for you." Laya nodded and rose. "Guess it's déjà vu, sir. Let's hope for a better ending." She walked into the briefing room. The same faces as before, Admiral Cortez at the head, intelligence officers along the wall, a legal advisor this time, and 2 witnesses from the flight deck. She stood at attention. "Captain Thompson," Cortez began, "you are aware of the purpose of this inquiry." "Yes, sir." "You knowingly disregarded a return-to-base order, engaged enemy forces, and endangered Navy property and personnel." "Yes, sir." "Explain yourself." The silence before she spoke felt endless. "I heard Lieutenant Decker's distress call. She was surrounded. Rescue was 4 hours out. I had the fuel to make one pass. I made it." "You violated a lawful order." "I did, sir." "You put yourself at extreme risk." "Yes, sir." "And you saved her life." She hesitated, meeting his eyes. "Yes, sir." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Do you understand the position you put this command in? You set a precedent. Every pilot who hears your story will think they can rewrite orders in the air." "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "orders are written for structure, not for surrender." A flicker crossed his face, anger, admiration, something between the two. The legal officer cleared her throat. "Captain, would you have accepted capture again if roles were reversed?" Laya's voice softened. "I would have prayed my commander did what I did." The admiral let out a slow breath. "You realize what this looks like, don't you? You've become the face of adaptation, and now you've made adaptation look like rebellion." She nodded once. "Sometimes, sir, they look the same." The room went silent again. Somewhere outside, a jet catapulted off the deck, a reminder that the world hadn't stopped for any of this. Cortez finally spoke. "Your actions will not go unpunished, but neither will they go unrecognized. Official reprimand. Suspension of flight status for 30 days. Unofficially," he paused, "you did the right damn thing." Laya's throat tightened. "Thank you, sir." "You'll stay on ship during review. Dismissed." She saluted and left, the sound of her boots echoing down the passageway. When she reached the end of the corridor, Brennan was waiting. "How bad?" he asked. 30 days grounded." He smirked. "Could have been worse. Could have been better." He nodded toward the deck. "Decker asking for you." The infirmary was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of medical equipment. Lieutenant Decker sat on the edge of a cot, arm bandaged, uniform torn. When she saw Laya, she straightened instinctively. "Ma'am." "At ease," Laya said, pulling up a chair. Decker smiled weakly. "They said I owe you my life." Laya shook her head. "You owe me nothing. You did everything right. Except getting shot down. That wasn't your fault." Decker studied her commander's face for a moment. "I heard about the reprimand." "It's just ink on paper." "I'm sorry, ma'am." Laya met her eyes. "Don't ever apologize for being worth saving." Decker blinked fast, emotion fighting to stay hidden. "I thought I was ready for it. Combat, I mean. But when I hit the ground, I froze. I remembered what you said, that fear doesn't go away. I kept thinking about you. What you did, it kept me alive." Laya exhaled, the weight in her chest both heavier and lighter. Then it was worth it. Decker's voice cracked. I was so scared. Laya reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. You were supposed to be. The following weeks crawled. No flight hours, no missions. Just paperwork, simulator time, and silence. She thought grounding would feel like punishment. It didn't. It felt like grief. Every evening she walked the deck, watching other jets launch into the sunset. Each one disappeared into the horizon, and she felt a strange mixture of pride and distance. One night she found Brennan on the observation platform. He didn't turn when she approached. Still packing the rails? He asked. It's either that or talk to psychologists who keep asking if I feel closure. He chuckled, and do you? She thought about it. No, closure's for endings, this isn't one. He looked at her, then what is it? Transition, she said, from surviving to leading. He nodded slowly. That's the hardest one. They stood in silence, the sea stretching endless beneath them. Sir, she said after a while, you ever wonder what the difference really is between duty and conscience? All the time, he admitted. Duty tells you what's right for the system. Conscience tells you what's right for the soul. The trick is knowing when they stop agreeing. She smiled faintly, and when they do, you fly anyway. She laughed softly, spoken like a man who's broken a few orders himself. Only the bad ones, he said. Her flight status was reinstated on a gray morning over the Mediterranean. She went through pre-flight checks with her usual precision, but this time she wasn't alone. Lieutenant Decker was flying as her wingman again. Before boarding, Decker stopped beside her. Ma'am, permission to ask something personal. Go ahead. When you saved me, did you think you might not make it back? Laya looked at her, eyes steady. I knew I might not, but fear's not a reason to stay in the sky when someone else is dying on the ground. Decker nodded, understanding what those words cost. As they climbed the ladder to their jets, Brennan's voice crackled over the deck speakers. Viper 1 cleared for launch. Good to have you back. She smiled beneath her oxygen mask. Good to be back, sir. The catapult fired. The jet leapt from the deck into a rising sun. Up here, everything made sense again. But even in the quiet hum of altitude, her mind drifted, not to glory, not to guilt, but to understanding. Every war writes new rules, she thought. Some are tactical, some are moral. The hardest ones are written in blood and silence. When they landed hours later, the deck crew lined the railings, clapping. Not for the flight, but for the return. Brennan waited near the tower, arms folded. How's the sky? Still loud, she said, climbing down from the cockpit. Still honest. He grinned, then it missed you. She looked out at the horizon, the waves turning gold beneath the fading light. I missed it too, but I think I needed the ground to remember why I fly. Brennan nodded, and why's that? She thought for a long moment, then answered softly, because every time I take off I promise myself if anyone falls, I'll be the one who turns back. He smiled, the kind of smile reserved for the few who truly understand. That's leadership, Laya, the dangerous kind, the real kind. She looked at him, wind tugging at her hair, the sea stretching infinite around them. Leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing anyway. That night she wrote one last entry in her logbook. Orders tell you what to do. Conscience tells you who you are. And when the two disagree, history decides which one was right. She closed the book, tucked it away, and stepped out onto the deck. Above her, the stars looked close enough to touch. She whispered, sometimes survival isn't about staying alive. It's about staying human. And in the quiet rhythm of the sea, she finally believed it. How do you end a story that never really stopped? Captain Laya Thompson wondered that as she stood once again before a room full of new pilots, younger, sharper, untouched by fear but already tracing her legend. The lecture hall at the Naval Aviation School was silent except for the faint buzz of overhead lights. Rows of uniforms, names she didn't know yet. Faces that looked at her not as a person, but as a story. She returned to the same podium she'd stood at months ago, the first time she'd told them that pilots must be warriors too. But today felt different. Calmer, sadder. She looked down at her notes but didn't read them. Instead, she began softly. They told me pilots don't engage. The words hung in the air like a confession. They told me we fly, we evade, we wait, and maybe that's true until the rules stop fitting reality. She paused, scanning the faces. Some looked inspired, others uncertain, all listening. I didn't choose to fight, she said. I chose not to surrender. There's a difference. One is pride, the other is survival. She stepped away from the podium and walked slowly among them. They'll teach you to trust your instruments, to read your radar, to follow orders. All of it matters. But when you're on the ground and everything's gone wrong, none of that will save you. Only one thing will: who you are when no one's watching. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the projector behind her. Fear, she said softly, isn't weakness, it's awareness. It means you still care whether you live or die. The trick isn't to erase it, it's to fight beside it. A young man in the front row raised his hand. Ma'am, did they ever tell you that what you did changed policy? She smiled faintly. They told me it inspired policy. But change doesn't come from rules, it comes from choices. The kind you make when nobody will ever know if you made the right one. Another hand went up. A young woman, eyes sharp, voice steady. Ma'am, if it happened again, if you were shot down today, would you do the same thing? Laya took a long breath. The question wasn't new, but it still hit deep. Yes, she said finally. Because in that moment, rules won't matter. You'll hear the sound of your own breathing, and you'll realize the only order left is the one that comes from your will to survive. The woman nodded slowly. Laya looked around one last time. Just remember, survival isn't glory. It's grit. It's staying alive when everything says you shouldn't. It's holding on to who you are when everything tries to take it from you. When she finished, they stood and saluted. The sound of 200 boots hitting the floor echoed like thunder. She returned the salute, but her eyes were wet. Later, after the room emptied, she stayed behind. The projector light flickered against the wall, showing a still image, her Fa-18 in flight. Her old call sign, Viper 1, beneath it. She turned it off. The silence that followed felt like closure, but not the kind that ends things. The kind that lets you move forward. Outside, the sun was setting over the Nevada desert, the same kind of light she'd fallen through that day in Syria. She walked to the edge of the training field, where the desert stretched for miles. Dust lifted in thin spirals, glowing orange. Commander Brennan joined her there, hands in his pockets, wearing civilian clothes now, retired at peace. Still giving lectures? He asked. Still trying to make sense of them, she said. He smiled. I heard your name officially in the new doctrine. Thompson Tactical Continuity Model. Sounds impressive. She smirked. That's just a long way of saying fight back. He chuckled. You've come a long way, Laya. Not sure I went anywhere, she said softly. I just kept going. He studied her face, then nodded. That's all survival really is. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade. You ever think about it? He asked quietly. The crash. Every day, she said. But not with fear anymore, more like respect, for the person I was before and for the one who came out of it. You've changed a lot of lives. So did the desert, she said. It just taught me the hard way. The last of the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The air cooled. Somewhere behind them, the faint sound of jets echoed, training flights returning. Brennan turned to her. You know they'll still tell pilots not to engage. That'll never change. She nodded. That's fine, rules should exist, but so should exceptions. He smiled. You really are the Navy's contradiction." "Maybe," she said, watching the first stars appear, "but contradiction keeps people alive." That night back in her quarters, she opened her old flight log, the one she'd carried since her first deployment. Its pages were worn, edges curled from salt and sand. She flipped to the back and began to write. 3 years ago, I thought survival was about endurance. Now I know it's about memory. Because when you survive, you owe the world something: honesty. The kind that doesn't come with medals or speeches. The kind that just tells the truth. She paused, listening to the faint wind outside, and continued. They told me pilots don't engage, but life doesn't always ask permission before it tests you. Sometimes you have to fight with whatever you have, even if it's just the will to keep breathing. She closed the book. For the first time in years, she felt no need to rewrite anything. Months later, she was back at sea, one last tour before rotation to teaching full-time. The carrier cut through calm water under a full moon. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, the same scent that had always felt like home. Her squadron prepped for night operations. She suited up slowly, methodically, the motions familiar as breathing. Lieutenant Decker approached, helmet under her arm. "Permission to fly your wing, ma'am." Laya smiled. "Permission granted." "Think the sky missed us?" Decker asked. "It always does," Laya said. "It just waits." They climbed the ladders to their cockpits. The deck crew gave thumbs up. Engines roared, catapults locked. Laya glanced to her right, Decker's jet beside hers, canopy reflecting the moonlight. "Viper flight," the tower crackled. "You're cleared for launch." Laya smiled beneath her mask. "Copy, tower, Viper flight rolling." The catapult fired. The carrier fell away beneath her as the Fa-18 surged into the night. And for a moment, suspended between ocean and stars, she remembered the fall, that first ejection, the fire, the silence. Except now there was no fear, only calm. She climbed higher, the sea shrinking below, the horizon endless ahead. "Beautiful up here," Decker said over the comms. "Always," Laya replied. "Don't forget, the sky's not just where we fight, it's where we heal." They flew in silence for a long time, two silhouettes crossing the moon. When they finally turned for home, the ocean glittered like glass. The carrier lights waited below, small, steady, certain. Laya thought of the words she'd once said to a room of young pilots. Courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about moving anyway. As her wheels touched down on deck, she realized something else. The desert hadn't broken her. It had defined her, not as the devil pilot, not as the legend, but as a woman who refused to let survival be silent. The engines wound down, the canopy lifted. The night air hit her face, cool, real, alive. Brennan's voice came over the deck radio, older now, distant but proud. "Welcome home, Viper 1. She smiled, home. And as she stepped onto the deck, surrounded by the sound of waves and engines and laughter, she finally understood the truth she'd been circling for years. Courage isn't the roar of defiance. It's the whisper of endurance. The choice to stand when no one's watching. The quiet act that doesn't need applause. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.